episode of First Laps from the Shanghai paddock, where it's even raining a little bit a couple of hours after the race. A race won by Andrea Kimi Antonelli, his first ever Formula One win. Of course, an emotional moment for him, an emotional moment for his family, and that has led to some great scenes both on and under the podium. But also a nice and emotional moment for Toto Wolff. Already on the team radio, he said, or he clarified after, that was kind of meant as a nice revenge on people who thought Kimi Antonelli was promoted to F1 too early last year. And Toto said, well, this basically justifies that it was not too early and that he is learning. So Kimi has put a really good and solid, strong and really mature weekend together. Having said that, no matter how great it was, Toto Wolff said we have to keep our feet on the ground. And the funny bit is, in his post-race media session, there were a couple of Italian journalists, and he basically told the Italian journalists what to write and which headline to go with, because he said, I already know what the headlines will be in Italy tomorrow. It will be a Grande Kimi, a Kimi world champion. And Toto said, that's exactly what we don't need. We don't need the hype. We don't need the pressure. He said Formula One is kind of depressing business, because if you put the car in the wall in Japan, then everyone forgets about what happened in China. So he said, please, we need to stay calm and both feet on the ground. Kimi still has a lot to learn. He said Kimi still will make his mistakes this year. But having said that, Kimi is undoubtedly learning, and also learning fast. And that kind of relates to what we discussed in yesterday's video, when Kimi Antonelli was quite open in the press conference, saying, well, I still need to improve my risk versus reward balance, my management in that regard. I put that question to Toto Wolff, and then he said, oh, did Kimi really use those words? And I said, yes, he did. And then Toto started to smile and said, oh, that's good, because then at least he's listening to me, because that's a topic they talked about behind the scenes. So he said, yeah, that's a key element, that Kimi is really learning, he's maturing, he's also really mature in all the meetings with the engineers going on behind the scenes. So definitely progress, but Toto Wolff said it will still take time. The good thing is, Toto said there are probably like 20 elements you need to be not just a Formula One champion, but hopefully one day be a great Formula One champion. And he said out of those 20 elements, there are 19 that you can learn. One element you cannot learn, and that's a pure speed. And he said Kimi, without a single doubt, has the pure speed. And that's the main thing. And the rest can all be developed. Now, an important landmark for him today, but also what Toto Wolff called a perfect moment in overall. Because he said since 2014, there have been 2 perfect moments in F1, according to Toto Wolff, for his personal experience. And he said today was one of those 2. And he meant Kimi winning his first race, Mercedes getting a 1-2, but also Lewis Hamilton getting his first podium for Ferrari, and Peter Bono being in the middle. And he said, for me, that was the perfect picture on the podium. So Toto Wolff enjoyed that one. Also, Lewis Hamilton enjoyed that one. Lewis Hamilton likes China in general, likes this circuit. Of course, won the sprint here last year. And Lewis Hamilton has a huge fan base around this track. And today, getting his first Grand Prix podium for Ferrari. He has been a lot more positive in his media appearances this season so far. And today was maybe the highlight of that, because Lewis said, yeah, mentally I'm feeling maybe better than ever before. Physically, I'm feeling great. So everything was positive. And also, his idea about the racing was positive, because Lewis Hamilton said, I really enjoyed the battle we had, the battle with teammate Charles Leclerc, but also the battle with George Russell coming through to finish second in the end. But he said that's kind of the best racing I've had for a very long time in Formula One. And that kind of made me think back to my go-karting days. So Lewis Hamilton, really positive about the racing, just like, of course, as you would expect, the Mercedes drivers are. But not everyone in this paddock is happy with the racing that we've seen in China. And the most outspoken was, of course, Max Verstappen. He basically had a chat in the written media pen for 7 minutes. And for a written media session after the race, that's quite long. Part of that was, of course, about his own race, the starts. He said, well, same issue as yesterday, different one from Melbourne. They thought they fixed it yesterday, but clearly that was not the case. Also talked about the cause of his DNF, ERS cooling issue. But by far the most part of his session, he talked about the regulations And even though some drivers liked it here in China more than in Melbourne, of course related to the layout, completely different. This is like a harvesting rich circuit. Melbourne was a harvesting poor circuit. But Max Verstappen still not a fan, because he said, well, fans that like this kind of racing, they don't understand racing, because Max Verstappen said this has nothing to do with racing. This is Mario Kart. So he thinks the regulations are just fundamentally flawed, also really difficult to fix. He would love to go back to like a V8 with maybe some electrical component, but he also said, yeah, that's really unlikely to happen anytime soon. It will also not happen next year. So he just came back to the point he made before, that F1 should have listened to the drivers earlier, that the FIA should have listened to the drivers earlier. And Max Verstappen said, I already warned against this in 2023, but back then no one listened. So Max Verstappen, really outspoken, still far from happy with the rules. Then that was brought up in the media session with Toto Wolff, and Toto Wolff said, well, Max Verstappen is in a horror show at the moment, and he meant the situation at Red Bull, because he thinks Max's criticisms of the F1 regulations is closely linked to the weekend that Red Bull had, the difficult weekend that Red Bull had. Max Verstappen himself said, well, that's not the case, because even if I would be the one winning, I would still not be a fan of these regulations. I've looked at the onboards from qualifying, and that car, and that was his quote, literal quote, he said that car looks horrendous to drive. So Toto feels a bit for Max and for the car that he has to drive. The overall show, Toto Wolff thinks it's much better than what Max Verstappen thinks of it, although he did admit that some elements can and maybe should be improved. The main one is qualifying, because still, yeah, lift and coast in the qualifying lap is probably not how F1 should be. And Toto Wolff said, especially for a full attack guy, that's how he called Max Verstappen, for a full attack guy like him, that's really difficult to accept. So that's the bit that he understands. But he said the actual racing he quite likes. And then he said, even more important than what the drivers think is what the fans think. And Toto Wolff added, all the data we have seen and all the data Stefano Domenicali has shows that the fans love it. I'm not sure if that's fully true, but that's what Toto said based on the numbers. Having said that, all of that basically means that there will be no knee-jerk reaction ahead of Japan. The FIA always said there will be an evaluation after the sprint weekend in China. That evaluation with all the teams and stakeholders will go ahead, but there will be no changes to the rules ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix. Also makes sense in a way, because there is a huge gap after Japan, so a huge gap between Suzuka and Miami. And if they feel the need to adjust something, that can be on the deployment side, can be on the harvesting side, can be for qualifying. If they feel the need to adjust, they prefer to use the gap, so 4 weeks without Formula One, to use that break to come up with something that hopefully makes it better. But the FIA also feels that the product they have now is not as bad as some others in the paddock think, and that the product basically doesn't need tweaking on a really short notice. So no changes before Japan. Before we all move to Japan, we still have to talk about some winners and losers of this race. And of course, the main losers would be McLaren. A double did not start. For Lando, that was the first one in his Formula One career. For Oscar Piastri, is the second one in 2 weeks, and that's rather painful. Of course, Oscar did the sprint, but he has not completed a single racing lap on a Sunday in 2026. After the race, the drivers clarified that it was a electrical issue on the PU side, but not exactly the same issue on both cars. So yeah, still highly complex with the new rule set, of course, but yeah, today a bit of a nightmare for McLaren, and relates to what Andrea Stella said yesterday, and what basically, yeah, got emphasized today, that they need the 2023 scenario, and that means they need to outdevelop the rivals with their upgrade packages. That will start in Miami, probably quite a big push in Miami already. And they say we need to hope for the 2023 scenario and use our winning mentality for the from the last couple of years. So just like Red Bull, I think Red Bull is a bit more fundamentally unhappy with the car, at least this weekend. McLaren says our overall concept is still quite okay, but just needs to be developed a lot more. So both teams have work to do. Then the winner side of things, we have to talk about Haas and Alpine getting P5 with Oliver Behrman today, and Alpine getting P6 with Pierre Gasly, and even double points with also Franco Colapinto scoring a point at P10. And especially for Haas, of course, it's great. In Bahrain, they look quite good, and everyone expected Haas and Alpine to lead the midfield. Melbourne was slightly different and also slightly more difficult. But here, Haas really impressed a lot of people in the paddock. I talked to team boss Ayo Komatsu after the race, and he said, well, first of all, it shows that you can get quite far with good reliability under a new rule set. McLaren not even making the start, some other cars hitting trouble, including Max Verstappen. And then you can get quite far. But when I mentioned Max Verstappen, we also have to emphasize that Max was actually behind Oliver Behrman, and even more so, he was basically behind him for 2.5 seconds for a very long time. So that tells you that the race pace that Haas has shown today has been really, really impressive. And that's what Komatsu called monumental for the team. He said this is a monumental day to beat Red Bull on merit. That was the quote he used. And given that Max was behind Oli Behrman for such a long time, that's probably justified to say. So Haas leaving this track, with all smiles basically. Some of the others would look for revenge and bouncing back in Suzuka. We will talk about that in 2 weeks' time in Japan. So for now, thanks a lot for watching and hope to see you again next time.